2,000 years ago, a carpenter from Nazareth walked into the temple and declared war, not with swords, not with armies, but with words that cut deeper than any blade. The Pharisees were the most respected men in Israel. They had dedicated their entire lives to following God's law, and Jesus called them whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside but full of dead bones within. Whitewashed tombs, dead bones. This wasn't just an insult, this was a revolution. The religious establishment wanted him dead, and they would get their wish. But here's what they didn't understand. You can kill a man, you can't kill an idea. What Jesus said to the Pharisees didn't just change Judaism, it changed everything. It changed how we think about God, how we think about religion, how we think about what it means to be good. And 2,000 years later, this conflict still echoes in every church, every synagogue, every human heart that struggles between the letter of the law and its spirit. This is the story of that war. The perfect keepers. To understand this conflict, you first have to understand who the Pharisees really were. They weren't villains, they were heroes. In a world where the Roman Empire crushed everything sacred, the Pharisees were the ones who kept Judaism alive. They memorized every word of the Torah. They built fences around the law, extra rules to make sure no one could even accidentally sin. They tithed on their mint and their dill and their cumin. They fasted twice a week. They prayed at every appointed hour. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders. The people looked up to them. The Romans respected them. They had earned their position through decades of discipline and sacrifice. And then this unknown rabbi from a backwater village started gathering crowds, started saying things that made no sense, that the prostitutes and tax collectors would enter the kingdom of God before them. Imagine hearing that, after everything you'd sacrificed. But this was just the beginning of the confrontation. The carpenter's son. Jesus came from nowhere. Nazareth was so insignificant that when people first heard about him, they asked, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" He had no formal religious training, no credentials, no position. He worked with his hands, building tables and doors while the Pharisees studied sacred texts. And yet when he spoke, something happened. Crowds gathered by the thousands. The sick came hoping for healing. The broken came hoping for hope. He taught with an authority the Pharisees couldn't match, not because he quoted more scholars, but because he spoke as if he actually knew what he was talking about, as if he had seen it himself. Authority without credentials. The Pharisees had studied God their entire lives. Jesus spoke as if he knew God personally. This was either the most arrogant blasphemy imaginable or something else entirely, something they couldn't admit, something that would cost them everything they had built. The tension was building toward an inevitable collision. The Sabbath War. The first major clash came over the Sabbath. The Pharisees had built an elaborate system around it. 39 categories of forbidden work. You couldn't walk more than a certain distance. You couldn't carry anything heavier than a dried fig. You couldn't heal unless someone's life was in immediate danger. And then Jesus walked through a grain field on the Sabbath, and his disciples picked some heads of wheat to eat. The Pharisees were outraged. This was work. This was sin. This was everything they had spent their lives protecting against. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Then Jesus went to the synagogue and healed a man with a withered hand. On the Sabbath, in front of everyone, he looked at them and asked, "Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" They had no answer because they had forgotten something crucial. The law was supposed to serve people. People weren't supposed to serve the law. And this insight would change religion forever. Outside vs. inside. The Pharisees were obsessed with purity. They washed their hands before eating, not for hygiene but for ritual cleanliness. They cleaned the outside of their cups and dishes. They avoided contact with anything that might defile them. Sin was something external, something you could avoid by following the right procedures. Jesus saw it completely differently. Clean outside, rotten inside. He said it's not what goes into a person that defiles them, but what comes out. Evil thoughts, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit. These come from within, from the human heart. You could wash your hands 1,000 times and still be corrupt. You could follow every rule perfectly and still be spiritually dead. This was revolutionary. The Pharisees had built their entire system around external compliance. Jesus was saying that God looks at the heart, that you could be scrupulously religious and completely miss the point. And this terrified them because they knew he was right. The heavy burden. Religion had become a crushing weight. The Pharisees had identified 613 commandments in the Torah. Then they added thousands more interpretations and applications. Every aspect of life was regulated. Every moment carried the possibility of failure. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. The common people couldn't keep up. They worked in the fields, they fished, they struggled to survive. They didn't have time to master every nuance of the law, so they felt permanently guilty, permanently inadequate, permanently far from God. And Jesus offered them something radical. He said his yoke was easy and his burden was light. Not because he eliminated the law, but because he got to the heart of it. Love God. Love your neighbor. Everything else flows from there. Love God, love neighbor. The Pharisees had turned religion into an impossible obstacle course. Jesus turned it back into a relationship. And that made all the difference in how people could approach the divine. Sinners welcome. Nothing scandalized the Pharisees more than who Jesus ate with. In that culture, sharing a meal meant acceptance. It meant equality. It meant blessing. And Jesus ate with tax collectors who were seen as traitors working for Rome. He ate with prostitutes who were ceremonially unclean. He ate with sinners, the Amharites, the people of the land who didn't keep the law properly. The Pharisees were horrified. A true rabbi would never defile himself like this. A true holy man would separate himself from contamination. But Jesus had a different view. It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. He told stories about lost sheep and lost coins and lost sons, about a God who runs to embrace the prodigal, about a father who throws a party for the one who squandered everything. Lost found celebrated. The Pharisees saw holiness as separation. Jesus saw it as transformation. And this different vision would reshape how we understand divine love. Whitewashed tombs. In Matthew chapter 23, Jesus unleashed his most devastating critique. 7 times he said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites." He called them blind guides who strain out gnats and swallow camels. He said they were like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside but full of dead bones and uncleanness within. Beautiful outside, dead within. This wasn't anger for its own sake. It was grief. Jesus wept over Jerusalem because he saw where this was heading. The religious leaders had taken the key to knowledge and not only refused to enter themselves but blocked everyone else from entering too. They had turned the house of prayer into a den of robbers. They devoured widows' houses while making long prayers for show. You shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. The system that was supposed to connect people to God had become the very thing keeping them away. The gatekeepers had locked the gate and thrown away the key. This confrontation sealed his fate, but his words have echoed through every generation since. The eternal legacy. They got their wish. The Pharisees, along with the chief priests and the Sadducees, conspired to have Jesus executed. They found their charge: blasphemy. He claimed to be God's son. They handed him to the Romans, who did what Romans did. 3 days later, his followers claimed he rose from the dead, and nothing was ever the same. The movement exploded across the Roman Empire. Within 3 centuries, it conquered Rome itself. Not through armies, but through an idea that couldn't be killed. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Today, Christianity has over 2 billion followers. The Pharisees' descendants became Rabbinic Judaism, which also transformed. Both traditions still wrestle with the questions Jesus raised. What matters more, the letter or the spirit? The ritual or the heart? The rules or the relationship? Letter via spirit. Every time someone asks whether religion should be about external compliance or internal transformation, they are still fighting the same battle Jesus fought in the temple 2,000 years ago. The conflict between Jesus and the Pharisees wasn't just about first-century Judaism. It was about something timeless, something that still plays out in every human heart. We all have an inner Pharisee, that voice that wants to reduce everything to rules, that measures worth by performance. that builds walls between the righteous and the unrighteous, always placing ourselves on the right side. For judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Jesus offered a different way. Not lawlessness, but love as the fulfillment of the law. Not abandoning standards, but understanding their purpose. Not ignoring behavior, but transforming hearts. The Pharisees asked, "How do I avoid sin?" Jesus asked, "How do I become the kind of person who naturally does good?" One approach leads to pride or despair. The other leads to transformation. Rules transform into love. 2,000 years later, the choice is still yours. Will you be a whitewashed tomb, or will you let the inside match the outside? Will you shut the gate to others, or will you help them find their way? The carpenter from Nazareth is still asking the question. What will your answer be? If this changed how you see religion, subscribe. The vault has more wisdom waiting.